My parents body shamed me after I reached 400 pounds. My sister laughed and said, "You're an embarrassment to this family." What I did next left her speechless. I, 32M, stood in front of the full-length mirror in my childhood bedroom, staring at the person I'd become. 403 pounds. The number had stopped meaning anything months ago. It was just another reminder of how far I'd fallen, how completely I'd let myself go after the accident that took my fiancée 3 years earlier. My parents had invited me over for Sunday dinner, which should have been my first warning sign. We hadn't done family dinners in over a year, not since the last disastrous gathering where my mother spent the entire meal discussing her friend's son who'd just run a marathon. The pointed looks in my direction had been impossible to miss. But my father had called personally, and there was something in his voice that made me say yes. Something that sounded almost like concern, though I'd learned not to trust that particular tone from him anymore. The moment I walked through the door, I knew I'd made a mistake. My sister was there with her husband, both of them looking like they'd stepped out of a fitness magazine. She'd always been the athletic one, the achiever, the golden child who could do no wrong. Standing next to her, I felt like a different species entirely. Dinner was tense from the start. My mother kept glancing at my plate, watching how much I served myself with barely disguised disapproval. My father was unusually quiet, which was somehow worse than if he'd just said whatever was clearly on his mind. My sister and her husband exchanged those little knowing looks that siblings recognize instantly, the kind that say they discussed me extensively before I arrived. We made it through the main course before everything fell apart. My mother brought out dessert, a beautiful chocolate cake, and when she cut the slices, she deliberately gave me the smallest piece. When I noticed, she told me she was just looking out for my health, that someone needed to since I clearly wasn't capable of doing it myself. My father jumped in then, telling me they'd been talking, that they were worried about me, that I needed to get myself under control. He said I was killing myself slowly, that I was throwing my life away, that I'd become a shell of the person I used to be. Every word landed like a physical blow, but I sat there and took it because some part of me believed they were right. Then my sister started. She told me I needed to hear some hard truths, that everyone had been walking on eggshells around me for too long. She said I'd used my grief as an excuse to give up on life, that I'd become lazy and pathetic. She told me I needed to stop feeling sorry for myself and take responsibility for what I'd become. I tried to defend myself, tried to explain that depression wasn't something you just snapped out of, that I was struggling in ways they couldn't understand. But she just laughed, actually laughed, and told me I was an embarrassment to the family. She said she was ashamed to tell people I was her brother, that she'd stopped posting family photos on social media because she didn't want her friends to see what I looked like. Her husband nodded along with everything she said, adding that tough love was what I needed, that coddling me hadn't worked. My parents sat there and let it happen, occasionally chiming in with their own observations about my failures and shortcomings. Something broke inside me during that dinner. Not my spirit, surprisingly, but something else. The part of me that still cared what they thought. The part that believed I owed them my pain and my shame. Sitting there, being verbally torn apart by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I left that night without saying much, just thanked them for dinner in a flat voice that made my mother frown with concern. But I wasn't sad anymore. I was angry. And anger, I was about to discover, could be incredibly motivating. The next morning, I made an appointment with a therapist. Not because my family was right about me needing help, but because I realized I'd been carrying their judgment along with my own for far too long. I needed to separate what I actually felt from what they'd made me feel. Dr. Martinez became my anchor over the following months. She helped me understand that my weight gain had been a symptom, not the problem itself. The problem was unprocessed grief, depression, and a family system that had never taught me healthy ways to cope with pain. She also helped me see that my family's intervention had nothing to do with love and everything to do with their own discomfort with my visible struggle. I joined a gym, but not for the reasons my family would have assumed. I joined because I needed to feel strong again, to reclaim my body as something that belonged to me and not to their expectations. I started with just walking on a treadmill for 10 minutes a day. Some days, that 10 minutes felt impossible, but I kept showing up. I also started cooking real meals for myself, not because I was trying to lose weight, but because I was learning to treat my body with respect rather than punishment. Dr. Martinez helped me understand the difference between self-care and self-hatred, between making changes because you love yourself and making changes because you hate who you are. The weight started coming off, slowly at first, then more noticeably. But something more important was happening. I was building a life that felt like mine. I reconnected with old friends I'd pushed away during my darkest period. I started working on a novel I'd abandoned after my fiancé died. I adopted a dog from the shelter, an older mixed breed that nobody else wanted, and we became each other's reason to get up in the morning. 6 months after that dinner, I'd lost about 60 pounds. My family didn't know because I'd stopped responding to their messages and calls. At first, they'd reached out frequently, probably feeling guilty about how harsh they'd been. My mother left long voicemails about how they'd only said what they said because they loved me. My sister sent texts saying she hoped I wasn't being too sensitive about everything. But I needed space from them to figure out who I was without their constant judgment. Dr. Martinez called it establishing boundaries, and it felt revolutionary. The transformation wasn't just physical. I started submitting my writing to literary magazines, something I'd never had the courage to do before. To my shock, one of them accepted a short story about loss and recovery. Then another accepted an essay about grief. Suddenly, I had a small but growing portfolio of published work. I got promoted at my job, partly because I was finally present and engaged again, partly because I'd started taking initiative instead of just existing in the background. My boss mentioned that something had changed in me, that I seemed more confident, more alive. A year after the dinner, I was down 140 pounds, and I'd sold my novel to a small publishing house. It wasn't a huge deal, not the kind of thing that would make headlines, but it was mine. I'd taken my pain and turned it into something meaningful, something that might help other people feel less alone. I was also dating again, cautiously. Nothing serious yet, but I'd learned that I could still feel attraction and affection, that my heart hadn't died with my fiancée. She would have wanted me to be happy, to live fully. It had taken me a long time to believe that. My publisher wanted me to do a small book tour, just a few local bookstores and libraries. One of the events was scheduled at a bookstore in my hometown. I almost canceled it, knowing there was a chance my family might find out and show up. But then I decided I was done hiding from them. The night of the reading, the bookstore was more packed than I'd expected. About 40 people came, mostly strangers interested in the book, but as I scanned the crowd from my seat at the front, I spotted them. My parents, my sister, and her husband, sitting near the back with expressions of complete shock. I read an excerpt from the novel, a passage about a man learning to forgive himself for surviving when someone he loved hadn't. My voice only shook once. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, and I felt something shift in my chest, like a weight I hadn't known I was carrying suddenly lifting. During the Q&A, someone asked where I found the courage to write so honestly about pain. I told them the truth. I said that sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who force you to become the person you were always meant to be. I said that I'd learned the difference between changing yourself because you hate who you are and changing yourself because you're finally ready to love who you can become. I didn't look at my family when I said it, but I knew they heard. After the event, people lined up to buy signed copies. I talked with each person, grateful for their support, trying not to think about my family hovering at the edge of the room, clearly waiting to talk to me. When the last customer left, there was no more avoiding them. My mother approached first, and I could see she'd been crying. She told me she was proud of me, that she'd had no idea I was doing all of this. My father stood behind her, looking uncomfortable but also impressed in a way I'd never seen before. He said the book was good, really good, like he was surprised I had it in me. My sister hung back, her arms crossed defensively. Her husband looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. When my parents stepped aside, she finally came forward. She told me I looked good, the words stiff and formal. Then she said she was sorry about what she'd said at the dinner, that she'd been too harsh. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel much of anything, actually, which was its own kind of revelation. I told her I appreciated the apology, but that what happened that night had taught me something important. It taught me that I didn't need their approval to build a life worth living. She flinched like I'd slapped her. My mother started to say something about family needing to forgive each other, about moving past hard times. But I stopped her, gently but firmly. I told them that I'd forgive them eventually, that I was working on it in therapy, but that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending that dinner hadn't happened or that their words hadn't cut deep. I'd spent a year learning to value myself, to understand my worth beyond their expectations, and I wasn't ready to let them back into my life in a meaningful way. My father asked if I was punishing them, his tone defensive. I told him I wasn't, that this wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. I needed to protect the version of myself I'd worked so hard to become, and right now, that meant maintaining distance from people who'd shown me that their love came with conditions I couldn't meet. Update 1. The confrontation at the bookstore happened 3 months ago, and my life has continued to move forward in ways I never expected. The book has sold modestly but consistently, and I've received messages from readers all over the country telling me how my story resonated with them. Some of them have shared their own struggles with grief and family rejection, and knowing I've helped even one person feel less alone makes everything worthwhile. I'm down to 280 pounds now, but honestly, I think about my weight less and less. It's become just one aspect of who I am, not the defining feature of my existence. My focus has shifted to what my body can do rather than how it looks. I ran my first 5K last month, something I never imagined possible. I finished dead last, but I finished, and that felt like victory enough. My family has been persistent in their attempts to reconnect. My mother calls weekly, leaving messages about family events I'm missing, about how much they want me to come back. My father sent me a card on my birthday with a check inside and a note saying he's been reading my book to try to understand me better. My sister has texted a few times, mostly surface-level stuff about wanting to grab coffee. But I've held firm on my boundaries, which Dr. Martinez says is healthy and necessary. I've explained that I need more time, that rebuilding trust doesn't happen overnight, and that I won't compromise my mental health to make them comfortable. Then 2 weeks ago, something unexpected happened. My sister showed up at my apartment unannounced. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. She'd lost weight, a lot of it, and not in a healthy way. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow. She looked like she hadn't slept properly in weeks. She asked if she could come in, and despite my better judgment, I let her. We sat in my living room, an awkward silence stretching between us, until she finally started talking. She told me that her husband had left her 4 months ago, right before my book reading. He'd been having an affair with someone from his gym, apparently for over a year. The divorce was ugly and public, and she'd lost most of their mutual friends in the split. She'd also lost her job due to the stress affecting her performance. Then she said something that genuinely surprised me. She told me that watching me at the bookstore, seeing how I'd transformed my pain into something meaningful while she'd just been cruel, had destroyed her. She'd been forced to look at herself honestly for the first time in years, and she hated what she saw. She admitted that she'd always been jealous of me, even before the weight gain. I was the creative one, the sensitive one, the one who felt things deeply. She'd built her entire identity around being perfect, around achieving and performing. And when I'd fallen apart after my fiancé's death, it had terrified her. My visible struggle reminded her that perfection was fragile, that any of us could break at any moment. So she'd lashed out. She'd tried to make herself feel superior by tearing me down, by convincing herself that I was weak and she was strong. But now that her own perfect life had crumbled, she finally understood what I'd been going through. She understood that grief and depression aren't signs of weakness, that they're just part of being human. She told me she'd started therapy herself, that she was trying to figure out who she was without the achievements and the perfect marriage and the carefully curated image. She said she didn't expect me to forgive her or to let her back into my life, but she needed me to know that she was genuinely, deeply sorry for everything she'd said and done. I sat there listening to her pour out her heart, and I felt something unexpected. Compassion, not the kind that excuses behavior or erases hurt, but the kind that recognizes shared humanity. My sister was broken in many of the same ways I'd been broken. She'd just hidden it better for longer. I told her I appreciated her honesty, that I could see she was genuinely struggling. I also told her that I couldn't be her support system right now, that I was still healing from what she'd done, and I needed to prioritize my own recovery. But I gave her Dr. Martinez's contact information and suggested she continue with therapy. She cried then, really cried, and thanked me for not throwing her pain back in her face the way she'd done to me. She said that was more kindness than she deserved, and maybe she was right. But I've learned that being kind doesn't mean being a doormat. It means treating people with basic human dignity while still maintaining your boundaries. After she left, I called Dr. Martinez for an emergency session. I needed to process what had happened, to make sure I wasn't falling back into old patterns of prioritizing everyone else's feelings over my own. She assured me that showing compassion while maintaining boundaries was actually a sign of incredible growth. Update 2. It's been 6 months since my sister's unexpected visit, and the dynamics of my family relationships have continued to evolve in complicated ways. My book has been optioned for a potential limited series by a streaming platform, which is surreal and terrifying and exciting all at once. I've been working with the screenwriters to adapt the story, making sure the heart of it stays intact. I'm down to 250 pounds now, and I've started working with a personal trainer who specializes in helping people recover from long-term obesity. But more importantly, I've maintained my mental health, continuing therapy weekly and practicing the self-care routines that have become essential to my well-being. My sister has been in intensive therapy and has reached out a few times with updates on her progress. She's not asking for forgiveness anymore, just sharing her journey in the same way I might share mine with an acquaintance. There's a respect for boundaries that wasn't there before, and I appreciate that. She got a new job in a completely different field, something more aligned with her actual interests rather than what looks impressive on paper. My parents have been slower to understand why I've maintained distance. My mother especially struggles with it, unable to accept that you can love someone and still need space from them. She started therapy too, at my father's insistence, which shocked me. Apparently, that night at the bookstore affected him more than he let on, and he's been doing his own work to understand how his parenting style contributed to our family's dysfunction. Last month, my father asked if he could meet me for coffee, just the two of us. I agreed, curious about what he wanted to say. We met at a neutral location, a cafe neither of us had been to before, starting fresh in a new space. He told me he'd finished reading my book for the 3rd time, and each time, he understood more about how badly he'd failed me. He said he'd been raised in a family where emotions were weakness, where men didn't cry or struggle or ask for help. He'd tried to raise me the same way, and when I'd fallen apart after my fiancée died, he hadn't known how to help me. So instead, he'd criticized me, trying to shame me into getting better because that was the only tool he'd ever learned. He told me he was wrong, that he'd been wrong about so many things, and that he was trying to learn how to be a better father even though I was an adult now. He wasn't asking me to forgive him or to come back to family dinners. He just wanted me to know that he was working on himself, that he was trying to break the cycle of emotional unavailability that had been passed down through generations. I told him I appreciated his honesty, and for the first time in years, we had a real conversation. Not about my weight or my failures or his disappointment, but about our lives, our hopes, our fears. He told me about his own father, about the ways he'd been hurt and how he'd sworn he'd be different but had ended up repeating the same patterns. I told him about my fiancée, really told him, sharing memories and grief I'd never felt safe expressing before. We didn't solve everything that day, didn't erase years of hurt with one conversation. But we started something new, a tentative connection built on honesty rather than expectation. My life now feels full in ways I never imagined possible during those dark years after the accident. I have genuine friendships, creative work that fulfills me, and a relationship with myself that isn't based on shame or punishment. I'm even dating someone seriously now, a woman I met at a grief support group who understands loss and recovery in ways my family never could. The irony isn't lost on me that my family's cruelty, their body shaming and rejection, ultimately pushed me toward the life I was always meant to live. If they'd been supportive in the way I'd wanted, I might have stayed comfortable in my misery, never finding the motivation to truly change. Their harsh words broke something in me, but in breaking, I discovered I could rebuild myself into someone stronger. I don't know what the future holds for my relationships with my family. Maybe we'll find our way back to something resembling closeness, or maybe this careful distance will be permanent. Either way, I'm okay. I've learned that my worth isn't determined by their approval, that I can be whole and happy without their validation. The person staring back at me in the mirror now isn't the same one who stood in that childhood bedroom 2 years ago. I'm lighter, yes, but more importantly, I'm free. Free from the weight of their expectations, free from the belief that I'm not enough as I am, free to build a life that feels authentic and meaningful. And that freedom? That's the real revenge. Not hurting them back, not proving them wrong, but simply living well despite everything they said I couldn't do. They wanted me to feel ashamed of who I'd become. Instead, I learned to be proud of who I was becoming. If you like this story, please like this video and subscribe us for more such real life-based stories. Thanks in advance.